I worked the front desk at a Sydney hotel. An American businessman arrived at 4:58 p.m. for his 5 p.m. check-in. He was already sweating. Not from the heat, from anxiety about being 2 minutes early. He asked if early check-in would affect his loyalty points. I told him check-in started at 3 p.m. He'd been sitting in our lobby for 2 hours, waiting for his appointed time because that's what the confirmation said. When I explained Australians treat times as suggestions, not contracts, he pulled up his email, highlighted the 5 p.m. in yellow, asked if we had written policies about punctuality expectations. I told him we had a pool and free beer at the bar. He asked what our beer schedule was. I said whenever you want one. He asked for the hours in writing, if you're already noticing how deep I go into the cultural psychology behind these interactions. This is the standard every video hits. If that level of detail is your speed, you'll want to stick around. Subscribing is how you actually catch the next breakdown. A tourist asked our Melbourne cafe for real coffee, not that European stuff. My coworker said, "We're famous for coffee." He said, "Then why is everything so small? Where's the large?" She explained our sizes. He insisted American large was the international standard, said Starbucks proved it. She told him Starbucks failed in Australia. He said that was impossible. She said, "Google it." He did, on the spot, then asked why Australians rejected American innovation. At our Brisbane pharmacy, an American demanded NyQuil. We don't stock it. He said, "How do Australians get sick then? Like we just suffer through colds without American medicine." He left to find a real pharmacy. Here's what happens when America's productivity obsession crashes into Australia's "she'll be right" philosophy. A project manager in Perth, an American consultant, joined our team. First meeting, he showed up with a 47-slide deck for a brief introduction. Scheduled for 30 minutes. He asked if we had a projector. We did. He asked if someone could take formal minutes. I said, "We usually just chat." He said, "How do you track action items?" I said, "We remember them." He stared at me like I'd suggested we communicate through interpretive dance. Then he asked if we could circle back to establish KPIs before we drilled down on synergies. I told him we were hiring him to install new software, not invade a small country. He said American corporate culture values strategic planning. I said Australian culture values getting home before dark. He asked what time we knock off. I said 4:30, maybe 5 o'clock. He said, "So you work half days on Friday?" I said that was every day. His eye twitched. He spent 3 weeks trying to schedule meetings. Sent calendar invites with 15-minute buffers and color-coded priority levels. Nobody showed up on time. He'd be sitting there at 2 p.m. sharp, alone, refreshing his laptop. People would wander in at 2:07, coffee in hand, asking if he'd seen the game last night. And this right here is the kind of cultural contrast most people never notice until it explodes in front of them. I track these patterns full-time, so you don't have to. If you want the inside version of stories like this, the stuff casual viewers miss, subscribing keeps you in the loop. He filed a complaint about cultural unprofessionalism. Boss asked if the work was getting done. I said yes. He said, "Then, what's the problem?" The American said, "The optics." My boss had no idea what that meant. Neither did I. The American tried to explain perception management in corporate environments. My boss said, "Mate, it's software installation, not the Olympics. I manage a Gold Coast resort." American family checked in. The dad asked for our daily activity schedule. I said, "Check the beach, maybe grab some fish and chips, see how you feel." He said, "No, the structured itinerary, the one we prepaid for." I told him we didn't have prepaid itineraries. He showed me his booking confirmation. It said full resort amenities included. He'd interpreted that as planned activities from dawn to dusk. Asked what time the mandatory breakfast briefing started. I said breakfast is just breakfast. He said, "But how do we know what to do each day?" I suggested deciding when you wake up. He pulled out a laminated family schedule. Had every meal, activity, and bathroom break planned in 15-minute blocks. Color-coded by family member. Asked where he could post it for group accountability. kids looked exhausted, and they'd just arrived. I work at a Darwin mechanic shop. An American brought in his rental car because the check engine light was on. I popped the hood. Forgot to refill the washer fluid? That's it. He said the light was red. I said, yeah, means you need more fluid. He said, shouldn't that be blue for information? I said colors don't mean the same things here. He demanded I check the full diagnostic system because red means emergency in America. I told him it'd cost $80 for the computer scan. He paid it. Computer said low washer fluid. He asked if Australian cars were built to different safety standards. I said no. You just need to fill the blue liquid. He said this would never happen in America because their systems were intuitive. I pointed at the washer fluid cap. Had a windshield symbol on it. He said the symbol was unclear. He filed a complaint with the rental company about defective warning systems, wrote that Australian cars were dangerously under-engineered. The rental company called me, asked what happened. I said he ran out of washer fluid. They said, that's it? I said, yeah. They asked if I charged him $80 to learn that. I said he insisted. They laughed for a solid minute. I'm a tour guide in Cairns. American couple booked our reef snorkeling trip. The husband asked how many safety certifications our boat had. I said all the legal ones. He said, can I see documentation? I said it's in the office. He said he'd wait. I radioed back. My boss faxed over a blurry copy from 1997. The American studied it like the Dead Sea Scrolls. Asked why it wasn't digitally available. I said we're a boat tour, not NASA. He asked about our emergency protocols. I said don't touch the jellyfish. He said, that's the entire protocol? I said also don't swim away from the group. He pulled out his phone. Started typing. His wife asked what he was doing. He said, documenting safety inadequacies for our travel insurance claim. We hadn't even left the dock. On the boat, he wore 3 life jackets. We gave him one. He brought 2 from home. Asked if our flares were Coast Guard approved. I said we had an EPIRB. He asked what that was. I explained emergency beacon. He said, why not just use flares like normal countries? I said because EPIRBs work better. He said America invented maritime safety, so he'd trust their methods. We're surrounded by ocean. We invented nothing. We just live here. I work at a Sydney airport. American businessman missed his flight because he showed up exactly 2 hours early as required. His flight was domestic. Domestic is 1 hour. He argued that international standards said 2 hours minimum. I explained those were international flight guidelines. He said standards should be universal for consistency. He was asked to speak to someone in charge of Australian aviation policy. I said that'd be the government. He asked for their customer service number. I told him the government doesn't have a customer service line for flight timing opinions. He said that proved Australia's infrastructure was decades behind. Asked how we coordinate efficiency without standardization. Said we don't really coordinate. We just show up and see what happens. He looked like I'd told him we navigate by stars and vibes. He demanded to be rebooked immediately. I said next flight was in 4 hours. He said that was unacceptable. Asked what our passenger compensation policy was for misleading guidelines. I said you missed your flight, that's on you. He said American Airlines would have held the plane. I said no, they wouldn't. He said they held one for him in Dallas once. I said then you should fly American in Dallas. He asked for my supervisor. My supervisor said the same thing I did, but with more mate S in the sentence. The American said our casual attitude was professionally inappropriate. My supervisor said that was fair enough and walked away. The American stood there holding his boarding pass like it might suddenly become valid through sheer willpower. He spent 3 hours at our airport bar, drinking expensive beer, writing a complaint email on his laptop, kept asking other Americans if they'd also experienced systemic inefficiency in Australian systems. Most of them were pretty relaxed about their travels. One guy said he'd been here 2 weeks and stopped wearing a watch. The businessman said that was cultural Stockholm syndrome. Look, Americans aren't wrong to value punctuality and efficiency. They've built incredible things with that mindset. But watching them try to apply corporate urgency to a country that closes for public holidays nobody's heard of is genuinely funny. Australia runs on near enough is good enough, and it works fine. Maybe not optimally, maybe not by American standards, but we get where we're going eventually. We're not stressed about it. If this whole breakdown gave you that finally someone said it clarity, imagine having this level of insight on tap every week. The people who subscribe aren't chasing entertainment. They're staying a few steps ahead of the cultural chaos. Your call. If you've survived American efficiency culture meeting Australian she-be-right energy, know exactly what I mean. Share your stories. I need talk no, we're not alone.